Hello, Jacqui.
Good morning.
Okay, yeah, I think we should go ahead and get started so that we stay on time as much as possible. I wanted to welcome everybody again to the Hawaii Island Chamber Economic Development Committee and the Japanese Chamber Economic Development Committee. So both Toby and I, we are counterparts for the respective chambers. We wanted to welcome everyone, mahalo everybody for their time, and proceed with our presentation this morning. We have Jacqui Hoover. Mahalo, Jacqui, for being on. And Jacqui can maybe elaborate a little bit more about all the different roles she has. But we've known Jacqui for many years from the Hawaii Island Economic Development Board, as well as from the leeward planning effort that she does as well. But today, her presentation will be on the CEDS, or the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy, which I know when I was working at the county years ago, this is a big deal. You know, it has a lot of potential impact for the County of Hawaii in terms of funding and where projects can be aligned with federal funding. So, but I wanted to turn it over to Jacqui and allow her to brief us on this. At the same time, if everyone could, and if you don't mind, just maybe if you could enter your name and your organization to the chat, so we just have an understanding of who attended our meeting today. So if you can put your name and your organization in chat. So I will turn it over to Jacqui. Take it away, Jacqui. Thank you.
Thank you, Toby. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. Miles, do I have screen share capability?
Yes, of course. Yes, you do.
Thank you.
You have the power.
Now let's see if I have the skills.
Hey, Jacqui, just wanted to check with you. Okay, if we record this?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'll share the slides with you if I can get them to come up for us. I take it no one's seen this yet. I'm not getting it up on the screen, am I?
No, not yet.
Hold on. Still not getting up there. Sorry about this, guys. I had to share something earlier and had this problem.
Jacqui, is this something we can do to help, or is there is it something you can email to Miles? And
yeah, I was going to say, Miles, can I email this to you? Sure. I've been having a problem with sharing screen for some reason today. I'm in the process of sending it to you right now, Miles.
Okay.
If I'd known Gaia was going to be here, I would have sent it to her earlier.
Sorry, Jacqui. I didn't.
No, Miles, I just sent it to you.
Okay.
So while I'm waiting for Miles to do this magic for me, just a little bit of background. The Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy is something that we do at the behest of the Economic Development Administration through the State of Hawaii Office of Planning and Development Sustainability. And we've had the privilege of doing the CEDS since the very first one done for Hawaii in 2005. At that time, I was with the Natural Energy Laboratory, so I wasn't involved in developing the CEDS except to participate as a contributor to it. I did lead the effort in 2010. It's done every 5 years, so we typically would have done it in 2015, but because of the delay, oh, thank you, Miles. Because of the furloughs and other federal concerns that year, we ended up not doing it until 2016. Hence, this current one is an update for 2022, 2026. Next slide, please. There we go. So basically, the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy is a strategy-driven plan, and it helps to build capacity and guide, in most cases, a regional economic prosperity. Hawaii State is the only one, because we're all islands, that our region is our state. In other areas, such as North and South Carolina, for example, you'll see them doing regional, so they might do part of North Carolina and includes part of South Carolina and their regional CEDS. But in Hawaii, we do one for each county, and then from those county CEDS, it bubbles up to the statewide CEDS. We do leverage existing efforts and plans to help maximize awareness, and this is all based at the EDA's, the Economic Development Administration, direction on industry clusters. So as I said earlier, we do update it every 5 years. The framework for the CEDS is to do a summary background of what the conditions are, do a strengths, weakness, opportunities, threats analysis, then come up with a strategic direction and action plan, and an evaluation framework so we can measure ourselves on how well we're doing. This framework is actually directed to us by the Economic Development Administration, and we must include these pieces in order to be in compliance with their requirements. And again, we're looking at both resilience and economic recovery this time because of COVID. So we're looking for a steady state, long-term efforts that will help bolster our economy and to withstand and avoid shocks, and also trying to be responsive to recovery, all recovery needs following whatever the incident might be, including and not limited to a natural disaster such as the lava activity we had a few years ago. Next slide, please. And again, part of the framework is we include business development, small businesses, entrepreneurship, innovation, education, workforce development, public, private, NGO, and NPO sectors. And specific to workforce development, one of the things I should mention is that the EDA looks at the CEDS as a primary vehicle for retaining or retention, as well as creation of jobs that pay a good wage and that help to both support and diversify the economy. So that's also one of the goals we have with CEDS. Next slide, please. And these are some of the industry clusters: ag and food, construction, creative industries, that includes your film productions, energy, healthcare, hospitality, tourism, visitor, manufacturing, our military, research, innovation, and technology, which under that we include astronomy, aerospace, and cyber. And these industry clusters are not necessarily the clusters that we would identify as for Hawaii County. Some of them may become more prevalent or be prioritized higher on other islands and in other counties, but these represent clusters that we do have and will be speaking to in Hawaii, especially for the state CEDS. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, we do this through the Office of Planning, more recently renamed the Office of Planning and Sustainable Development. And we have worked with them since 2005 to do this work. I have the privilege, along with our Economic Development Alliance of Hawaii Executive Director, to serve as the principal investigator and co-program manager for the CEDS at the state level, and have the privilege of leading it for Hawaii County. Next slide. And the Economic Development Alliance of Hawaii, just real quick background. It's an organization, a coalition of the 4 economic development boards across the state of Hawaii, Kauai, Oahu, Hawaii Island, and the Maui Economic Development Board, remembering that Maui has multiple islands. So they represent Maui, Molokai, and Lanai, and also the Hawaii Business Roundtable formed EDA. And we started in 1998 as a means of supporting and promoting the economy throughout the state. So we partner with each other to do this in our respective counties and collaborate on statewide points of common impact, such as the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy. Next slide, please. So we did and continue to receive support from the County of Hawaii. We were fortunate to receive an approval for an innovation grant from County Research and Development. However, we declined that grant, and in lieu of the grant and cash, we're collaborating with and receiving support from County through research and development. I saw Bob on early, so wanted to acknowledge that we are working very closely with R&D. It's just a difference in how we're partnering with them this time. Rather than taking a grant and cash contribution, we're asking them for a lot of support with respect to data collection, compilation, and analytics. And I'll share with you more why that particular strategy was taken this go round in a little bit. Next slide, please. So this is just the regulations that we're following. And as I mentioned earlier, the summary background, SWOT analysis, direction plan, and the evaluation framework. Next slide, please. And the whole purpose of the CEDS update is first and foremost to qualify Hawaii County and Hawaii State to secure funding through the Economic Development Administration, primarily through their economic adjustment programs. However, since 2005 and the first CEDS, what we're finding is that other federal agencies now will ask, if you seek funding from them, they will ask if your project, your initiative, whatever you're seeking funding for is included in your CEDS. So that really becomes a statement as to how important having this economic development strategy is. And I should also mention that while we do end up developing a report/plan for Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy, from the Economic Development Administration's perspective, the CEDS is more about process than about the outcome. The outcome is, in their mind, the benefit of having gone through the process, because what they really want to do is ensure that we're engaging with our community and that this is a community developed economic plan. It's not something that I sit in a vacuum and decide what the economic future of Hawaii Island or Hawaii State is going to look like. It's really about collaboration. And in this collaboration, we do both outreach and education, such as we're doing now. And some of the groups you see there that we have or plan to engage with are listed here. We also will engage with many others, but this just gives you an idea of the breadth of who we collaborate with. And as you see, it does cover a broad stroke of our community. And in addition to what you see on this list, as we move forward, if any of you are involved with other organizations that you feel we should be partnering and collaborating with, we're happy to do that. I will share with you that in doing the CEDS, because we want to make sure that we reach as many people of our community representing all socioeconomic arenas, I do a lot of small, well, pre-COVID at least, I did a lot of small group meetings where I'd be in someone's garage and there'd be 5 or 6 people in that garage in Ka'u or Puna or so forth. We are planning to do similar this time. I'm hoping that we'll be able to continue to do some in-person meetings as well as virtual, such as we're doing now. Next slide, please. So part of the CEDS process includes creation of an advisory committee. And we use this advisory committee and have the people who are serving on this advisory committee to help us with the direction of the economic development strategy that we develop for the island. They'll help us and say, you know, we see that you're paying a lot of attention, for example, to astronomy. Could you make sure that we're also including more information from agriculture? Or we noticed that you're focusing on innovation, but you haven't included anything on manufacturing, and we'd like to see some of that integrated into this. And again, by direction of the Economic Development Administration, job retention and creation, diversification of the economy, and to help spur economic growth. We want to do this in a manner of reciprocity so that our communications are not just Jacqui Hoover being the talking head, transmitting information, but also receiving feedback and taking in other people's information and opinions and experience, taking all of that into consideration so that we're building, as the title says, a comprehensive plan. And our runway is pretty short. We're starting active work. I've actually, many of you know, have been working on this for the last year, but we have had a delay with respect to release of funding and notice to proceed from the Economic Development Administration, primarily due to administration changes and changes in their guidelines, as well as the pandemic, obviously. Typically, we have a year to 18 months to do a CEDS. This year, however, we are deliberately, and we have contracted with the Office of Planning, Sustainable Development, and with the Economic Development Administration to have our work done and submitted by August 31st of 2022. The reason for this short runway is because we recognize that we're at a pivotal place in economic history for Hawaii. And we want to make sure, with election years and everything else coming up, you know, as you know, 2022 election, our entire legislature here in the state of Hawaii, every seat is open and being, you know, people are running for. We have a governor's race. At the federal level, there'll be more changes and so forth. And so we want to make sure that by getting our work completed by August 31st, that means we're already in the Beltway, in the Economic Development Administration, and presented it and approved, reviewed, approved, and able to work with the incoming administration at the county, at the state levels, but also working with Congress and any changes that are there, the CEDS will already be in place so that it's not something brand new that goes to the bottom of the pile on somebody's desk. It's something that's already alive and being discussed and being considered prior to all of the changes that'll take place later in the year and in early 2023. Next slide, please. So I think it's really important to discuss the pandemic and what changes there have been, what we need to consider moving forward, and how, if any, the lessons learned from COVID will impact how we do the CEDS. Of course, we have the requirements for compliance that I shared with you previously, but in the process of doing our work, what are some of the lessons learned? And one of the key lessons learned has been the change in expectations and behavior. I think, people who are on this call, including, for instance, Toby, who has retail, he's seen the changes in what our community, our residents, our visitors alike expect, how their behavior has changed as a result. And what that means is, so for those of you who aren't aware, my background is not just in economics, but also in systems engineering. So as a systems engineer, I'm looking at the whole of the system. How do all of the components fit together? And what do we need to do system-wide, as well as a background in education and economics. And for the first time, we're really going to have to focus on behavioral economics as we put the sets together to understand how and why people are behaving the way they are in, for lack of a better word, this new post-pandemic normal, which differs from typically doing what we refer to as neoclassic economics, which assumes that people have well-defined preferences and they're making their informed decisions based on those preferences. We know as a result of COVID that preferences, behavior, and expectations, as I mentioned, have changed. So we're going to have to look at that and integrate that into the comprehensive economic development strategy as we move forward. We're looking at long-term resilience in the face of multiple crises. On Hawaii Island, for example, we were already dealing with natural disaster impacts from lava, from storms, et cetera. Certainly, we're all looking at climate change as something that we have to face. But we were dealing with all of these things simultaneous to having to also deal with COVID. And then we're looking at what are some of the things we need to do both for prevention and mitigation. So are there things we can put in place that will help us respond to the next jolt or shock that we receive, whether it's from a natural disaster or from an induced scenario such as the 2008 mortgage and housing construction collapse, or something totally unexpected such as COVID-19. And having come through COVID or working our way through and out of COVID, are there things we need to do to have a backup and resilience and recovery and response plan for the next virus or scenario such as we're experiencing right now? And we also have to recognize that some of the impacts are what I refer to as cascading crises that may go on for years, including and not limited to, as I mentioned earlier, behavior. Does the community at large feel safe? For example, when will we return en masse to restaurants? Will it be when the governor or mayor lifts the restrictions and says anybody can get into a restaurant? Or is it going to be when we define for ourselves what safe is? So how has consumer behavior changed? And that note I have there about livelihood versus lives, we know that there are a lot of individuals who have chosen to leave the workplace and leave the workforce. And some of it has to do with decisions about how economics and finances work for them. For example, I know several young families where they have young children, and whereas previously both spouses were working, they've now lived with the pandemic and recognized that they'll have to do even more belt tightening, but they can live off of one income. And especially if mom or dad is staying home and providing primary childcare versus having to go and pay for childcare, where one of the salaries is actually just paying for childcare and fuel to get to work and not bringing in significant amount of extra income for the family. And I do not have the data here for Hawaii Island or for Hawaii State, but I can share with you that a recent study was done in California, and they've now gone back and revisited to make sure that their presumptions, their assumptions, their criteria, their metrics were correct. And in California right now, the #1 household expense for families with children requiring childcare, that #1 household expense is in fact childcare, not mortgage, not rent, but childcare. So I share that with you because, again, expectations, behavior, experience is changing. And as such, we're also seeing changes in business models, and simultaneously, as I've been discussing these last couple of minutes, the changes in how we plan and move forward. Next slide, please. And we also learned from COVID that we need to ask the correct questions. So the example that I give is when we had to transition from in classroom to remote learning, we all, and I'm so proud of our community, we all jumped forward to make sure that our students had the devices they need, a laptop, computer, and iPad. We didn't want those students who do not have those devices available to not be able to continue their education. So we made sure that we provided them with the devices. However, what we did was ask them, do you have access to the internet? And the student said, yeah, I've got access, no problem. What I learned personally, and we learned collectively, is that that was not the right question. The correct question should have been, do you have access to internet at your home? Because, for example, I delivered devices one day to Na'aleo, and what I was told is, oh, bring it to the community center. And I thought, oh, there must be, somebody at the community center who knows where all these students live, and he or she is going to go deliver these devices. That was wrong. The students were actually congregating at the community center because that's where they had access to the internet. So we were defeating the purpose of safe distancing, shelter safely at home, remote learning, because these students were all coming together anyway, because in order to access internet and to do their learning, they needed to be at the community center. They didn't have access at home. So I think that's something that certainly a lesson I've learned. And as we move forward with the CEDS and beyond, really making sure that we're asking the right questions. And one of the ways we learn how to ask the right questions is by ensuring that we have a broad cross-section of individuals participating in helping us to develop the CEDS. while every one of you on this call is important, and I certainly will be approaching each and every one of you to participate, I would be really doing a disservice to our community if I wasn't also reaching into communities of stay-at-home parents and so forth. So we want to make sure that we do a cross-section, and that some of the changes, some of the economic strategies we need to put in place for our community, in fact, are known primarily and first and foremost by real life experience, which means we have to also speak to those who are most vulnerable in our community. And that is where studies and work that's done by, for example, Vibrant Hawaii and Community First, while they don't necessarily fulfill all of the requirements of a CEDS, and they are not responding directly to the Economic Development Administration, the work that's done there, the information that's gathered, will help us with developing the CEDS. Next question, slide, please. So we'll also do focus group meetings. As I mentioned earlier, I hope to do, until we can do all in person, a combination of virtual as well as some in person, and focus groups such as including and not limited to chamber huis such as this, community associations, kupuna organizations, the Mauna Kea observatories, student organizations, other organizations like the Trade and Labor Associations. I mentioned Vibrant Hawaii. And I want to really emphasize student organizations. We have a great tradition here in Hawaii of saying, we are doing this for the next generation. We're doing this for the keiki. And one of the things that we often fail to do is invite young people, youth, and college age and so forth, invite their contributions and their thoughts and so forth. And I want to share with you, when we did the CEDS in 2016, I recognized that we needed to include young voices. And I had one group from Keaukaha, and they were ranging in age from 11 to 23, including students, obviously, in middle school, grade school, middle school, up to college, including a couple of grad students. And I tend to recognize that if you want young people to participate, you have to do something that serves as an incentive for them. So I took all of them for lunch at, I'm now going to forget what the name of the restaurant was. It's the one there next to Ice Pond, but anyway, in Hilo. But anyway, I took them to this restaurant, and I had invited 15 students, and all 15 showed up along with 2 of their teachers. And as we were discussing economic development, workforce development, education, and so forth, and having a nice lunch, we got to the end, and I said, okay, I'd like everybody to give their closing remarks. And I zeroed in on one young boy, 11 years old, and I said, you know, I've noticed you've been listening intently, and clearly you're processing what you're hearing. I hope you're not too shy to share with us, but we haven't heard from you yet. And what he said sticks with me to this day. He said, Auntie, it's great if you have a job for me when I graduate from high school or college, but if you don't find and help me find work for my mommy and daddy now, we're gonna have to move to Henderson, Nevada. And that just really struck me, that this young boy recognized that what we're doing needs to be more comprehensive, and it does have to be multi-generational. And I'm proud to say that we were able to find positions for mom and dad that got them higher wages and so forth. And I bring that up because you noticed we talked about workforce development. And what I learned is that in Hawaii, because we all tend to be very raised with the value of being humble and so forth, we have a lot of people who are skilled, but who don't apply for certain positions because they think they're not qualified. And so I think part of our job is to make sure we know our neighbors better and we're able to integrate. If I know of a position that's open, I know that, you know, John or Sherry down the street might not have the paper, the on-paper qualifications, but I know of a program at HCC or at the University of Hawaii Hilo that gives them a certification that now qualifies them for this. So that's what we mean by comprehensive. Next slide, please. And again, we'll have focus group meetings. All of you will be invited to participate in one or more of these focus groups. And as we announce cluster groups and focus groups, if you're interested in participating, please let us know. One of the things that has worked very well and made it easier for our community is, for example, at the resorts prior to COVID, they'd often ask me to come and do a focus group meeting with their employees pre-shift, for example, and I'm happy to do that. Guy, I hate to keep picking on you, but if Ryder Levitt wanted to have a staff meeting, for example, all hands on to participate and contribute to the focus group, to a focus group, let's say for example, in development and construction, that would be excellent. And what I like about these kinds of meetings is that we get everyone from, for example, in construction, from the laborer to the estimator to the engineer, and not just the mid-level managers, which all of us have been to meetings where we know that it's going to be the same group that's going to be sent because they're not high enough on the food chain that they can direct somebody else to go, and they're also not low enough on the food chain that they're not considered. And with the comprehensive economic development strategy, I think it's important for us to recognize we need to consider all people and all levels. Next slide, please, Mark. So here's an example of what might be a goal for us as we develop the CEDS. It might be, you know, focused on infrastructure and providing infrastructure to make our island, our county more competitive for economic development. So typically in the past, infrastructure has been defined as a network of roads, sewer, water systems, power, telecommunications, and so forth. And what we learned during the pandemic, especially, is that improved telecommunications and broadband is not they're not amenities anymore. They are critical infrastructure. And as a result, you see that there's already lots of plans and funding and other resources going to expanding broadband and making sure that our rural communities are included, and making sure that the diversification that we speak to about economy is attainable in all communities to the extent possible. Next slide, please, Miles. And so again, you know, the objective would be to, if that was our goal, then the objective would be to upgrade and expand telecommunications. And, you know, we would identify that there are numerous locations where there's inadequate or no broadband service. Some of the challenges presented by just the geography and the size of our island, and also include a measurement tool. So for example, we might track the extent of expansion, and there are various resources that are available, including the National Telecommunications and Information Administration broadband map. And for some of you who are already familiar and also participating in our state broadband WHOI, you know that another thing we can do as part of the CEDS process is to contribute to improving some of the resources that exist, because some of these resources, they might show Hilo because from a national perspective, Hilo is a small area, but they don't necessarily show Lower Puna or Ka'u, so we could improve these. Next slide, please. And again, another goal, assuring quality, technically skilled labor force through improvement of ability to attain and access education, and collaborating with the Workforce Development Board. We'll be working very closely with the University of Hawaii, Hawaii Community College, as well as Department of Education and private schools. And I think, it's important and certainly relevant to remember the quote of our former Secretary of Education, Riley, who would often say in his talks that we are currently preparing students for jobs that don't yet exist, using technologies that haven't been invented in order to solve problems we don't even know are problems yet. Sorry for the misspelling there. And one of the things that comes to roost at home for me, as I have two sons. My younger son is living in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and he has been on the front lines of COVID from the start. He is both a biotech engineer as well as a mechanical and explosives engineer, but he's also an advanced paramedic. And advanced paramedics on the continent, at least, often are your surrogate doctors in these small rural communities where they don't have a doctor for their ER. So he has been doing triage and so forth, and working in ICUs and labs simultaneously during COVID. And one of the things that I'm proud of is he helped to invent and they developed some new rapid test kits for COVID. And of course, prior to COVID, we had no need for this. So I think this speaks directly to Mr. Riley's assertion that these young people that we've educated and ourselves, there are jobs that we don't know yet, and we are going to have to invent technologies to solve problems as we face these problems. Next slide, please. And again, the objective might be market the need for job skills. And in Hawaii, a panel discussion that Think Tank Hawaii had was the need for us to find niches to expand in Hawaii, while simultaneously noting that we face an uphill battle to fix our labor market. And I will share with you that this panel discussion I was involved with Think Tank Hawaii actually took place in 2018. So if nothing, we recognize that the problem or the concerns have been exacerbated by COVID. Miles, I think you can quickly go through the next few slides because they're all examples such as this, and I'll share them with you, and the group can take a look and ask questions later if they want. Next slide. Continue. Next slide. Okay, so here, I think it's important that we recognize it behooves us all to work together and collaborate. And I really want to thank Hawaii Island Chamber and Japanese Chamber for inviting me to give this presentation. Some of you will also be invited to join the CEDS Advisory Committee, and all of you will be invited to participate in our focus group discussions. And more importantly, all of you are invited to share with me any thoughts you have, because I don't profess to be the expert at all of this. There are niches, there are concerns, there are looming problems that should be integrated into the CEDS that I don't even know about. For example, I recently learned from a favorite restaurant that the reason they are no longer doing breakfast, because I'd often have breakfast meetings there, is because they can only find enough staff to put one shift in place. So they do a little later lunch and end dinner earlier. And that way they're able to pivot and still serve the community, still stay open for business, but they definitely had to make some changes. And I wouldn't have known that without having that discussion. Next slide. So again, as we're moving forward, we need to think about the world until yesterday, which in my mind is pre-pandemic, and the day after tomorrow. And again, when we talk about expectations and behavior, we need to caution ourselves not to make decisions based on the pandemic years, which are an anomaly. We need to look at trends for, let's say, 5 years leading up to the pandemic, as well as 2020, 2021, 2022, to come up with what we're doing for tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. I know that there have been projects that have been delayed. We've not achieved some of the goals we wanted because of the pandemic. But as we move forward, do we want to focus exclusively on the infrastructure as we see it today? Or do we want to look beyond that? Do we want to recognize that right now we may not need that extra bypass road, but in 5 years, we're definitely going to need it. We also don't want to make judgments on, well, we haven't really had traffic problems, and so maybe we don't need the bypass road. Recognize that we haven't had traffic problems because we've all been staying at home. Don't make decisions on short-term anomalies. So, and not to be, Debbie Doomsday here, but just this morning I was on a meeting very early, and we learned that our inflation rate last month, January 2022 compared to 2021, increased by 7.5%. We're all seeing that, whether it's because of supply chain disruption, supply and market demand, whatever it is, we know that there's inflation. And right now, most economists are saying that it's going to be short-term, but I do think we need to integrate discussion about those kind of jolts to our economy here on Hawaii Island as we move forward with developing the CEDS. Next slide. And this is my last slide. Sorry for going on so long. I hope that I've been able to give you some information about the CEDS. And as I mentioned previously, please don't hesitate to reach out if I can provide any additional information, and especially reach out if you're interested in participating in the CEDS through the advisory committee, through focus groups, or even as a just friendly advisor and counsel to me. Thank you very much. That's it, Miles.
Mahalo, Jacqui, and that was a lot of really good information. I want to provide the committees here or the people here a chance to ask some questions. So I wanted to open it up for some questions for Jacqui.
Hey, Jacqui, this is Alan.
Good morning, Alan. Good to see you.
Hey, aloha. I know this is a probably a very harsh perspective, but I need to say it. I think as a government and many of our NGOs and organizations, we have done a good job of creating a book, but the book doesn't have a story in it. Okay, in other words,
good point.
We see the pages, we see the covers, we see the size of it, how many pages, but there's no stories in there. We have not spent enough time coming up with what ideas for new businesses or business activities. And let me give you a real good example. Is I'm finding out that because of COVID, which I don't think is an anomaly, by the way, it's only an anomaly because we didn't prepare ourselves for this thing to happen, and we should have. But there's a lot of people that are buying homes in Hawaii now at exorbitant prices because they're able to work remotely. They can, they don't have to work here anymore, and so they don't have to work at their workstation. They can work from here, and so that tells you something that might be something we could cater to start creating an infrastructure to have that. And that means that we're going to have better medical services. We're going to have higher education, things like this. So I think we need to spend more time coming up with ideas on creating businesses. Thank you.
No, thank you, Alan. And we do have quite a number of folks that have been looking at the impact of remote workers and remote work opportunities for both those who are in migrating as well as those we would like to prevent from out migrating in Hawaii. And one of the sticky points to that is also recognize that one of the things we've learned through COVID is the lack of understanding on equity. And that has become an expectation of our community. They really want better equity. And Alan, I think perhaps you've heard me say this before. I had the privilege of living in Rio de Janeiro for a number of years, working for an international company. And while I lived there, and to this day, Rio de Janeiro is definitely a have and a have nothing society. But for the grace of God, if we don't do and take steps such as what you've talked about and so forth, I fear that I could find myself living once again in Rio de Janeiro, except here on Hawaii Island where I was born and raised. So thank you for making that point. And it's certainly one that I think we need to keep our eye on as we move forward.
Jacqui, this is Toby, and I know you alluded to that several times in your talk, but I was going to mention that. I was going to say, with regards to DEI, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those are, I think, areas that are getting a lot of attention on the world stage. You have BlackRock, the CEO of BlackRock, writing open letters to CEOs talking about their DEI plans or ESG and ESG reports, and so I just was going to bring that up because it's difficult, right, for people to live here now without help from mom or dad or grandpa or grandma and so forth. But definitely opportunities on all sides. But I think that's you alluded to it. I just wanted to point it out that's important as well.
No, thank you, Toby, because that's what my experience was, for example, in Rio, as I refer to it as a have and a have nothing situation. And the reason I say have nothing is because those who are in that category had lost everything, including hope of ever being included. So thank you for reminding us all of that.
I did have a real quick question regarding, in the clusters, where would a retail grocer fit in on that cluster?
Businesses. It would be in our business cluster.
Okay, I didn't see businesses per se. I just saw.
I think it's a small business.
Oh, okay. All right, cool.
But that's a good point because, we did integrate astronomy specifically, even though that wasn't mentioned. But retail, I think, especially on our island, we have really learned how important retail is during COVID years. So thank you. I'll make that note.
Hi, Jacqui. It's Kurt Sharp. I've got a few
Kurt.
statements here. Hi. First of all, what Alan emphasizes is critically important. I've worked internationally now for about 40 years in different parts of the world. So I've been able to experience some good, a lot of it bad in terms of how people live and the infrastructures and the cultures and et cetera, right? And over the last year or 2 years, primarily post or pre-pandemic actually, when it was starting to build up, I would meet a lot of people on airplanes or at airports or at businesses meetings, and they would single me out and they'd say, "You're from Hawaii?" I said, "Yeah." "How much does it cost to live there?" So I would always say, "Well, a can of Spam costs about $4. A gallon of gas costs this much." And they said, "That's too expensive. I can't live there," right? So that was the overall feeling. The other thing is looking at the industry clusters. I don't see anything, and it is a critical element for any economic development project or plan or infrastructure, is anything about mass transit. You know, that becomes the heart of the community in terms of transportation, and I don't see that. And it is running into all sorts of problems anyway. You know? Now, my last statement is, give me a word and I'll talk 6 hours. Part of my my job in Asia Pacific was involved with overseeing operations in Australia and New Zealand. Now, I had a good friend who lived in the outback, and I said, "You know, how does he had 2 sons and a daughter. How do your children get educated?" And he told me about this remote program that Australian government has for the last 35, 40 years. And all the ranches out there and all the remote businesses all use this remote education program, which is sustained by the Australian government. And they take care of everything. And for 35, 40 years, kids have been educated by this system. It's accepted. It's well known. You know? And I think one of the issues that we had here in Hawaii when this whole thing was starting was the stop and go of kids going to school or staying at home. And, you know, the infrastructure wasn't built, in my opinion, to facilitate any kind of serious remote education program. Well,
Thanks,
basically,
Kurt.
that's basically
Thank you.
what
I
I got.
think thank you. I think that speaks to what so many people have alluded to during this period, that we need to develop new models,
Yeah.
whether it's in education or work and so forth. But thank you. And I'll certainly be contacting you directly.
Good, you can.
All right. So, sorry, gang, we're running out of time. We got a minute left. I did want to thank Jacqui again for your presentation, and I know you shared your contact information, so I want to encourage everyone to participate with Jacqui and CEDS in some way, whether individually or through your business or through the chamber. Miles, do we have any announcements?
Main one is on our golf tournament. We're still accepting sponsors and prizes. So if you want us to continue with the services that we do provide, hope we can count on your help.
Jacqui, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, and just real quick on our next meeting will be on March 10th, and I believe our presentation will be on is through AARP and the statewide legislative effort that they're proposing right now on a retirement sort of a plan for people with small businesses, outside of government.
It's called an
So
automatic
with that-
IRA.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so with that, I wanted to thank everybody for your time today, and we'll see you around.
Aloha.
You know,